Hello, welcome to video 3 in my short series of short videos on the very basics of sewing. So this video, possibly the most important one, is on pressing, which is holding down an iron on a finished seam, and that makes it into a very sharp, neat fold, and it looks very professional, transforms what your seams look like. So the main thing that you're going to want with this, in this video, anything that I use, I'll put the cheapest or the best value link that I can find below in the comments. So the very basics of pressing is with an iron, and you want to plug your iron in, and all we're going to do is put our iron on the fabric and then go in slow, controlled motions. So it's not very fast, it's just on and then slow. So there's a few things that you need to consider when you're pressing. First is, do you actually need the iron? Sometimes you don't. All pressing is just basically scoring the fabric so that it makes a very sharp fold. So sometimes you only need you don't need an iron, you can do without an iron. So you can either finger press it, which is where you just put your own body weight through your fingers onto it, or you can score it with a blade. So if you score it with a blade like that, it scores I don't think it actually scores the fabric when you do that, I think it scores the thread. But it does make a difference. But usually, especially after every seam that you do, like this is a seam, so after everything like that you do, this is what it looks like at the moment, by the way. So that's an amateur looking seam because it hasn't been pressed. So after every one of these, what you need to do is definitely press it. So then you need to consider the surface that is underneath your fabric. So my table, I don't want to iron on that. With this, I can iron on it and it's fine. Or you can use an ironing board, and there's things that you can buy specifically for sewing. I think they're filled with sand, sawdust, something like that, but you can iron on them. They're built to be ironed on. But before you do anything, you also need to make sure that your fabric won't get scorched, damaged, burned, or ruined in any way from the heat of the iron. So one thing that you can do is use greaseproof paper. I think it's got other names in other countries, but in the UK it's called greaseproof paper. It's used for cooking and things like that. And that just means that the metal is not directly on the fabric, so that makes all the difference for a lot of things. But some fabrics can't handle greaseproof paper. You'd need to put a cloth or a towel or something in between the fabric and the iron. And one more thing that you could do is use a towel. So this is for straight seams, you don't need to use a towel, but if we had a sleeve seam or something that was curved, we might want to put it over this so that we can press along a curve. So if this was a curve in some way, like a hood is often curved, sleeves are curved, you can do that. And this is for whatever I was last sewing, which I think was a hood for something waterproof. So you can unfold this and then fold it into different shapes. So this is for like the angle, the curve that I needed for the hood was this size, but you can fold this to any size you like. So those are the considerations to make. So number one thing that I haven't said yet is that before you actually do your finished garment pressing, if you're doing it with an unfamiliar fabric, always cut out some scraps and practice on that, because you want to find out your mistakes on scrap fabric, obviously not on your real garment. So my iron has been on far too long now, so I'll show you what pressing actually looks like. So just a reminder, this is what it looks like now. Not a very nice seam, looks very amateur. So if we now press this seam, all I'm going to do is lay the iron on this. Now I haven't tested this fabric at all, so I'm just going to put a greaseproof sheet down, and then I'm going to take the iron, I'm going to steam it once, and it's going to lay it gently on that fold. So I've made sure that the surface underneath my fabric can take the heat, and I've also put a greaseproof paper down just to, I don't know how it will actually be on this fabric, but I don't really care. So this is scrap fabric, so I don't know if you can see, but that is what it looks like after it's been pressed. So now I'll press the good side as well. So it's just slow, controlled motions. So this is that finished seam. So at the moment it's a bit, it's actually pressed in a bit, so you can see what the seam looks like underneath it. But that seam on a finished garment would look completely professional. That's what it would look like in a designer shop or anything like that. So the important thing with pressing is that you press before you press this seam before you do any seam that goes over it. So if the end of this here was going to meet another seam, I would have to press this before I do this seam here. Okay, so you can, what you want to do is organize your pressing so that you actually spend the least time pressing. So you would want to, let's say you were doing a garment that had several seams that all didn't overlap each other. You could do all of those, let's say there's 5 of them, do all 5 and then press all 5. But as soon as there's a seam that goes over one of those seams, you would have to press that seam before you do that seam. So you do not want to leave the garment till the very end and then press. What you need to do, as I've said now, is press this before you sew any seam that goes over this seam. Okay, so we'll do plenty of pressing as we do these the seams in the upcoming 5 seams videos. So you'll see pressing plenty more times. So just remember those rules: is the surface underneath has to be able to take the heat, the fabric has to be able to take the heat. If you want to do a curved seam, then I recommend using something like this towel that I use when I'm sewing at home. And you must press the seam before you sew the next seam that goes over this seam, because if this seam is unpressed, when you do the next seam, it won't look very good. So in our next video we'll finally be looking at actual seams and sewing. So it will be just a regular seam in the first one. We'll also go over a few basics like thread, needles, things like that. And then we will look at the 4 specialized seams that we're going to do that are going to, this is a regular seam, so the 4 specialized seams that we do are going to look at, I think 3 of them are much stronger than this seam, and also they cover the raw edge. So if you left that as a raw edge over time, it would already begun fraying. So all the 4 seams that we're going to do after the regular seam, which is the next video, the 4 seams that we're going to do after that all hide the seam, the raw edges completely as you sew the seam.